All right, everyone. So we are back now with chapter number 12. Uh, this is a chapter that relates somewhat to what we've been talking about in terms of emotion and health. So we're focusing on the idea of motivation. There are five sections of your book, section one, two, three, four, and five. Section five, I think, is on motivation in education. We're not going to cover that on the slides. And one of the reasons we're not going to cover that is because I don't necessarily like that section. So instead, I'm going to leave it to you to choose to read that section or not read that section. These first four we can go through, but I'm looking at what the book says, and there's a lot that I think could be said better or simpler. So we're just going to skip that part of it since it's not super relevant to things that we'll be talking about in the future. Fair enough. Please read chapter 12. At this point here, you should be somewhat into your article reviews. If you have questions, please send them our way. We will gladly get to you. And I hope in the meantime that you are having a good week as you get ready for the weekend, which is thankfully starting for us soon. So today we're talking about motivation. This idea that there is a process within a person or animal that causes them to move towards or away from an unpleasant situation, right? So either to move towards a goal or away from an unpleasant situation. So it causes us to move. It causes us not to stay stagnant. It causes us to think about the direction in which we want to go. Motivation is important because motivation is how you evolve from where you are today. You could be motivated to pursue a PhD. There are certain steps that you're going to make so that that happens. You could be motivated to end a toxic relationship. There are certain steps that you're going to make that happen. So our focus today is how we come up with motivation and how we decide to move forward with meeting that goal or escaping an unpleasant situation. So one of the ways that motivation sort of expresses itself is from our biological drives, right? So this idea that for decades we were studying motivation, we were thinking about we have biological drives, and these are innate biological drives, meaning that we're born with these drives to seek food and water, to procreate and have sex, to seek new situations, and to avoid cold and pain, right? However, drive theories only account for a small percentage of the full range of human motivation and the full complexity of human motivation. So these theories here can't account for everything. So there's a few different areas of human motivation that we'll look into, right? There's achievement, sex, love, and food. If you think about it, so much of what we do on a day-to-day basis has been focused on one, if not all, or some combination of these goals. Just by being here in front of your laptop or computer screen watching this lecture, just by being here in the lecture hall, right? You're already addressing the motivational concern of achievement, right? These other areas are in your life as well. You might address food later after this class is over, right? So we'll start by talking about hunger, because hunger, the drive for food, has been studied at length. It's very important to understand the biological understanding of that, as well as some of the psychological and physiological needs that we have for that as well. So when we think about motivation, when we think about intrinsic motivation, we're doing something for the sake of its own doing. Okay. So we pursue an activity for its own sake. Like we swing on a swing just to do it because swinging on a swing is fun, right? Extrinsic motivation is the pursuit of an activity for external rewards, such as money or fame. So when we think about internal motivation, something inside of us is making us want to do the activity. Extrinsic motivation means something outside of me is making me want to do the activity. I do this here because the activity is fun. So I read because it's fun versus I take this class because if I take this class, I'll become famous and a millionaire. weight. So I don't know if they have a class on health psychology at UNT, but they should. If I were teaching a class, we would spend a lot of time talking about the idea of weight and weight management. When we talk about weight, we're not just talking about uh, obesity. We're also talking about being underweight. We're also talking about the intrinsic motivation of food. We're also talking about the psychological underpinnings of what it means to be obese, to become obese, or to lose weight. Obesity and overeating both are not simply a result of failed willpower, emotional disturbances, overeating, right? We also have to contend with some of these things in addition to having to contend with our genetic biological mechanisms. Your body has a set weight that it wants to be. Things happen like trauma or anxiety or depression or excitement or celebration. And your body is constantly fighting to maintain that set weight. And sometimes, and the more, it almost seems like the more you try to lose weight, the more your body fights against you to stay at the weight you're at. Why? Because your body wants you to survive. And you've been surviving at that weight for a long time. If you drop a massive amount of calories to lose a massive amount of weight, your body thinks that you're in starvation mode and wants to keep you alive. So therefore, somehow the drive to eat becomes much stronger. And no matter how few calories you are ingesting, it takes forever to lose fat because your body wants you to survive. There are genetic influences on weight and body shape, right? Things like hunger, weight, and eating, which are regulated by a set of body mechanisms to keep people close to their set points, including your basal metabolic rate, number of fat cells you have, as well as whether or not you can burn brown fat. Brown fat has the strong ketogenic properties, which when burned, burns a lot of calories with it as well, right? So your body wants to stay at the same level that it's at. When a mutation occurs in the genes that regulate normal eating and weight control, the result could be obesity. So two examples of this, the OB gene and leptin, right? When your leptin levels are off, leptin is essentially essentially tells your body that you're full. If you don't have leptin, what happens is you just keep eating and eating and eating. So when this mutation occurs, then you begin to have issues with feeling full and feeling satisfied and deriving pleasure from food. And so you keep eating. Other factors include things like receptors in your nose and mouth, which urge you to eat more food, right? There is a dopamine release or a dopamine kick that takes place after you have sugary foods, right? If you have an unreactive reward system, so let's say that you're not getting enough rewards or enough of a dopamine kick from the foods that you're eating, you will eat more and more foods in order to get higher levels of dopamine. And then, of course, appetite suppressing drugs inevitably fail, with the reason being that your biological mechanisms override them. You can take all the appetite suppressing drugs you want, but eventually your body is going to force you to eat. And when it eats, it's going to eat a large amount of food. Those biological drives are extremely hard to overcome. So some experts think that health concerns about obesity have been exaggerated because many overweight people are otherwise fit and in good cardiovascular health, and many thin people are not. There is a very famous anecdotal story about a woman who was very, very sick. And every time she went to the doctor, they just kept telling her over and over again, the reason you're so sick is because you're so fat. So she finally decided that she was going to drop 75 pounds. And she did. She dropped 75 pounds and was still having the issues that she was having. They finally did further tests and found out that her sickness wasn't really related to the weight she was carrying. but they never ran the test because the only thing they focused on was how overweight she was. So we're still understanding that individuals can be overweight but still be healthy. We're also still understanding that individuals can be thin but still be unhealthy. There are huge environmental influences on weight, right? First, there's an increased abundance of fast food and processed foods, right? As well as uh, increased use of devices such as your microwave, which can make food very, very quickly. A high level of processing has to take place in order for your foods to be able to be warmed and created that quickly. So um, there is a widespread consumption of high sugar, high calorie soft drinks. You ever order a small at a fast food place and they give you this huge, gigantic, cup? Especially this last year, there's been a sharp decline in exercise and other expenditures, right? We're all stuck inside. We're not moving around. We play video games. We watch television. We buy things like HBO Now and Netflix. They increased portion sizes of food and drinks, as we've already said. So small now is basically what large was, and mediums now are basically what jumbo was. And abundance of highly varied foods that are all processed, right? What do they say about if you want to be healthy when you go grocery shopping? To shop on the perimeters, all the stuff in the middle is all the stuff that's bad for you, right? So things like sleeplessness, excuse me, excessive weight gain during pregnancy, so overeating during pregnancy, central heating and air. So um, because of central heating, you don't shiver. If you don't shiver, you don't burn your brown fat. And air conditioning, which we'll be turning on soon, right, because of the summer in Texas. If air conditioning takes place, then you're not really uh, sweating, and you're not really motivated to have less fat on you for the summertime. Not to mention exposure to certain cold viruses are also adding to that. So anorexia takes place. Anorexia is a fear of being fat with a distorted body image. There is a radically reduced consumption of food that takes place to where the person looks emaciated, right? So this is where you get into the situation where an individual has like 70 pounds, right? Who is a full-grown individual. There's things like bulimia, right? So excessive eating followed by forced vomiting. So you eat 10,000 calories in one sitting, and then you take laxatives or you take something else to make you vomit, and you immediately expel the food you just had. And then there's binge eating, so you don't purge, right? Chewing food and spitting it out without swallowing, maintaining normal weight, but obsessively worrying about gaining, and then having phobias about certain foods. In other words, you see a food and you freak out because of how many calories the food has and what that might do to you. We want to strive to look a certain way, right? And so with the presence of social media and the presence of sort of celeb fashion and how celebrities go about their preparing their own bodies for acting, um, there's a huge pressure to look a certain way and to act a certain way. And we see this in both men and women who have this idolized but fictionalized view of what a body should look like. So we see these images. We want our bodies to look like that. We want our bodies to look attractive and to look healthy. So there's things that we do to force our bodies to respond. And in doing so, we're going against our own genetic predispositions. All right, love. So there are several different types of love, right? We know that there's passionate love, compassionate love, and that origins of passionate love might begin in infancy when an infant attaches to their mother. We know that many things happen during the social bonding. So when a child is breastfeeding, we know vasopressin as well as oxytocin are being released. We know that these hormones help to bond the child to the mother, right? And characteristic feelings and actions that occur during attachment involve the release of such endorphins in order to encourage the child to be very um, into attaching to the parent. So, things that predict love. First, we tend to fall for people who are close to us, distance wise. Uh, Overall, long distance relationships don't tend to survive beyond the first few months. Reason being, we like to see people, like them to be near us. In the 1950s, you were about 80% likely to fall in love with someone who lived within around 3 blocks of where you lived, right? We also like people who are similar to us. We like people who look like us. We like people who like things that we like. We like people who are in our neighborhoods. We like people who believe the things that we believe. There are things like Match.com or eHarmony or Tinder, which are designed to help you find love in the digital sphere. I think the newest one, or one of the newest ones, is Facebook dating, which by no means should you do. With the idea of love being sort of a data driven science, that if you can match up digitally and match up statistically, that you are able to find yourself in a situation where you can find someone who would be a good mate for you. Now, attachment theory basically says that how you were able to attach to your parents has some indication of how you will be able to attach to people um, who are your significant others. Now, if you have a secure attachment, you are rarely jealous or worried about abandonment because your parent was always there. If you have an anxious attachment, then you're agitated or worried that your partner is someday going to leave. And if you're avoidant, you might have distrustfulness, um, and you might avoid intimate situations, right? Something happened probably with your parent that encouraged you to distrust people and to believe that you couldn't fully rely on them. When that happens, we find that you tend to choose mates that mirror the attachment that you had with your parent. What things make for good love? Intimacy, passion, and commitment. Intimate Intimacy is this idea that you can share things together, and we don't just mean physical intimacy. True trust and understanding one another. Commitment means you're with each other no matter what the situation is. And then passion, right? Uh, Being consumed by this love and having this love to inspire you to do greater things. You need all three of these: intimacy, passion, and commitment in order to have a long standing, long, successful, long suffering marriage. You have to have all three of these. So there are similarities between men and women on what they want when it comes to love. Uh, Men and women equally are likely to feel love and a need for attachment, and are also likely to express differences in having feelings of love and defining what true intimacy is, right? True intimacy for women typically tends to be defined as trustfulness, openness, honesty. In intimacy for men tends to be um, very much so constructed in terms of sexual intimacy, feeling close with another person. Women have entered the workforce in large numbers, right? And so part of the reason that we've seen an increase in the dissolution of marriages is that now both partners are out in the workforce as opposed to only the men being out in the workforce. Also, one of the things that we've seen um, is that sexists tend to be more alike in endorsing intrinsic motives as a requirement for marriage, right? They tend to be more alike in saying things like, I got married um, because of this need to love another person. So your motivations for marriage reflect and can give us a clue into how successful that marriage is likely to be. All right, sex. All right, motives for sex. So first, sex research. And do we have a class on the psychology of sex? I think we might. If we do, you should take it here at UT, right? But we know that there's been several different surveys of sexuality, right? We know there's been Kinsey surveys, we know that Masters and Johnsons have done several surveys. We know that the experience of orgasm is very similar, and we know that orgasms are the same regardless of the source of the stimulation. So all orgasms manifest physiologically in pretty much the exact same way. We know that later research has shown that people do, however, vary in the level of sexual excitement, sexual responsivity, as well as the levels of inhibition that they exhibit as a result of that. So, uh, so testosterone is a powerful promoter of sexual desire, right? But additionally, the experience of having sex before, as well as the context in which sex is taking place, is also important. So, big controversy right now is whether or not there's a difference in, or excuse me, is the difference on the biggest controversy is whether or not there are sex differences in the sex drive and what those sex differences actually are. Most gender differences in sexual behavior reflect women's and men's different roles and experiences in life, right? But hormones and brain circuits have also evolved differently in men and women, which would promote a different response in levels of sex. And culture is a part of this as well. In some cultures, women are expected to not enjoy sex very much. As a response to that, during sex, uh, uh, the response that they do have might be a very muted response as compared to those cultures. Women are encouraged to be very sexually open and responsive, right? So culture plays a very deep role in how sex is experienced and exhibited. There is this middle view that says men's sexual behavior is more biologically influenced. And there's a view that says women's sexual behavior is affected by circumstance, relationships, as well as cultural norms. So your brain is the sexiest sex organ. So if you are on dating apps, invariably, someone will have that in their profile that they think the sexiest part of you is not your body, but rather your mind. What motives might we have for sex? Pleasure. Seeking something that feels good. Intimacy. Sharing something very intimate and deep and, and vulnerable with another person. Insecure. Having sex in order to feel more stable in the relationship or more stable about your own feelings. partner approval. This is a heavy one right here. Doing it so that your partner feels happy. Peer approval. You see a lot of this in adolescence. So saying that you're having sex in order to be accepted by your friends. And then in the attainment of some goal. So sex being used as power. So gender differences occur in perceptions of what experiences are with sexual coercion. All right. The phenomenon of rape has been studied and continues to be studied at length, right? There are several different motives for rape, and all of them are primarily psychological. Narcissism and hostility and hatred directed towards women. The desire to punish, dominate, humiliate, punish the victim. Someone who wants to cause harm for the sake of causing harm to the victim. These are just this is the tip of the iceberg in terms of understanding how and why rape occurs at the frequency that it does. We know that cultures differ widely in understanding the rules of what sex is. We've spoken about display rules for the rules for when to display your emotions. There's also sexual scripts. So implied rules for how individuals ought to act, varying on their age, their orientation, their religion, right? So if you were someone who is a highly conservative member of a religion, you might not be expected to express your enjoyment during the process of achieving orgasm. Versus if you were in a culture which promotes sex, you might extremely enjoy the same orgasm and be very vocal with it. There's also gender roles, right? Men are expected to react and respond in sex in one way, whereas women might be expected to react and respond in sex in another way. So when we think about sexual scripts, these ideas of what we ought to be doing it and when we ought to be doing it, they can be powerful determinants of behavior, right? So that includes things like practicing safe sex, buying condoms, buying female condoms. And sexual scripts seem to be changing. And this is a largely response to women's changing economic dynamics. Women are becoming more and more equal. They haven't quite achieved equality yet, but becoming more and more equal, and therefore beginning to experience more and more power in terms of the sexual dyad. And so as a result, the scripts around what women ought to do and who they ought to be having sex are beginning to change. So many things determine sexual orientation, right? Traditional beliefs have not been supported, right? Traditional ideas for homosexuality have just not been supported at all. Actually, in the old version of the DSM, homosexuality was considered something deviant, and there were cures that were offered in order to get beyond that, right? Now we've become a little bit more educated, and we understand that there are very varying biological factors that influence the sexuality that one has. So things like genetics, things like hormonal exposure, things like prenatal events, so things that happen in the womb, things like environment, right? Biological factors cannot account for the diversity of sexual experiences, cultural customs, and responses. They only account for only a few of the varying things that we see in terms of sexual orientation. Okay, achievement. All right, so goals and goal setting has to influence why we have such a high level of motivation to achieve at work and at school. Goals work the best when they're specific, when they're challenging but achievable, are framed in terms of getting what you want rather than what you don't want, and are time bound. If you set a time that you want to achieve a goal, you will be much more successful at actually achieving that goal. So there's performance goals, which are framed in terms of performing well above others. And there's mastery goals, goals that are increasing our understanding and how to do some skill. A self-fulfilling prophecy is an expectation that you will fail. And after you have that self-fulfilling prophecy, what happens is you fail. So you say, I'll never learn this stuff. You don't study adequately enough. You give up trying, and then you don't learn it. I am not afraid to tell you, I am experiencing this right now with my goal of learning how to speak Mandarin. I have had the moments of saying, I'm never going to learn, pick this stuff up, and then I've stopped studying, and then I don't learn it. But if I said that, I will one day learn to speak Mandarin very fluently. If I keep with it, I will actually learn to do so. I have a long-standing goal, and the goal is to be able to give a full psych lecture in Mandarin. That's my goal. Just be able to do that. If I can do that, I'm speaking the language very well. But in order to do that, there's things I have to do. I can't just say the goal. I have to take steps to move myself forward in the achievement of that goal. And I am. Self-efficacy is the belief that you can bring about desired results on your own, such as mastering a new skill and reaching some goal. Self-efficacy is this belief in yourself to be capable to do the things that you want to do. What things increase job satisfaction? And this is something you'll speak more about and learn more about if you take a class in industrial organizational, right? So work that feels meaningful and important to you, when you have control over the aspects of your job, if the tasks you do are varied and multifaceted, if there are clear and consistent rules, if you have supportive relationships. There's nothing more like having a support. There's nothing better than having a supportive relationship amongst your coworkers. If they're there for you and support you, you can get almost anything accomplished that you need. And then receiving feedback that's useful helps as well as an opportunity for growth. You don't want to be at the same level, right? You want to rise, you want to get promoted, you want to make more money, you want to become at the top of what you do. And then last but not least, you want to have good working conditions, right? If you have a condition, a working environment, for example, where you're trying to do study outside on a park bench, right, while you're homeless, that is a different study environment than when you were at home in a place full of love and joy, right? Or if you're in an office that has suitable means to support you. So the conditions of work that you're in will determine your level of success and will be influential in the level of motivation you have to meet the goals that you have. Okay, that's all we have to say for this chapter. I'm going to now post this to the website, and I will talk to you all later. I bid you well adieu.